Well, let's turn now to the newly minted Deputy Prime Minister, David Lammy. Until very recently, of course, Foreign Secretary, and before that had an even more illustrious job doing this slot on LBC. Deputy Prime Minister, thanks so much for joining us this morning. Let's turn immediately to this question of Palestinian statehood. There are still a few dozen hostages left in Hamas captivity. What do you say to those, including their families, this morning, who say that you are insulting them and putting their families at further risk by recognising the Palestinian state, a large proportion of which is controlled by Hamas?
Lewis, I met with families just a few weeks ago, and I said to them that it was important for us as a government that whilst we abhor Hamas, we have prescribed Hamas. They're subject to 3 sets of sanctions since October the 7th, asset bans, and there can be no place for Hamas, that we must never confuse Hamas with the Palestinian people. And that's why we have worked with the Palestinian Authority to help them with funding, support to reform. We had Abbas here just a few weeks ago. We've signed a memorandum of understanding with them. The Prime Minister will make a statement later on today. But if we move forward to recognise a Palestinian state, we do so because we are holding out for a two-state solution, which is the only means of bringing peace to this troubled region.
But every British government before you, including previous Labour governments, have always stuck to the position, which is that recognition would become part, or be part, I should say, of a wider set of negotiations, which would give some leverage to the other side on the Palestinians. What's changed? Why was that wrong? And now recognition at this moment, which seems rather random, why is that the appropriate step to take place at this time, when all those other governments had a very different view?
Lewis, you're right to say the circumstances in which UK governments have done that. And you ask what's changed. Well, what's changed is when I said at the UN at the end of July that we would do this unless we saw a ceasefire. Well, what's happened since then is the Rafah offensive, which will lead to hundreds, maybe thousands of people losing their lives. What's happened since then is the E1 expansion and development that's been announced by the government, which would run a coach and horses between the north and south of the West Bank and make it very difficult to see how you would ever get to a two-state solution. And what's happened since then is more people have continued to die. And in the end, the children of Gaza and indeed the West Bank deserve a state of their own. And we cannot say that we must have perfect conditions to arrive at that state.
But you're recognising a state.
That's why the UK, alongside Australia, Canada, Belgium, announced that they are considering this, and we'll hear from the Prime Minister later on today.
But you're recognising a state which doesn't function as one, which is controlled, at least in part, by an organisation which, as you say yourself, is a terrorist organisation. Does it not give you any pause at all that Hamas will undoubtedly welcome this as a great victory?
Lewis, as I've said months ago, no state or organisation can have a veto on a judgment that the UK government should and must make that clearly is finely balanced. We've been very clear on our position on Hamas, but Hamas is not the Palestinian people. And it's mendacious, frankly, to confuse Hamas with the Palestinian people. And the desire for two states is a noble desire shared by every right-thinking person in the world. We recognize that recognition will not, in of itself, bring about two states.
So President Trump isn't right thinking in that case?
With the expansion that we're seeing, with the violence that we're seeing, I think it is important that European partners and other allies come together and make an assessment about whether this is the time. And I'm afraid it is clear that the current government seems to be not committed to seeing a ceasefire and seems not able to move forward with any kind of process at all.
You were you say that anyone who is right-thinking will recognise the justice of what you said and how important it is to do what you've done. President Trump shows no sign whatsoever in sharing your analysis of the current situation. We saw that despite all the pomp and the pageantry and all the things that your government laid out for him this week. It seemed to move him not one iota. Do you think there was any success in terms of Gaza and moving the president towards some sort of negotiated outcome as a result of what we saw this week?
Well, look, I've had many conversations with particularly Secretary of State Rubio and Vice President Vance about these issues. We have been able to find common ground on the issue of humanitarian aid and, of course, of doing all we can to get the hostages out. But they have taken a different view on recognition. I recognise that. I don't want to anticipate what the Prime Minister will set out later on today, but I do think it's important. And it is right to say that the US also has traditionally believed in a two-state solution. And it must be for independent governments to make an assessment of the best circumstances in which to bring that about.
What do you say to those who are saying this morning that this is less about geopolitics, it's less about the two-state solution, but more about internal Labour Party politics, and Keir Starmer acting in a way to see off his critics within the Labour Party, many of whom have long coveted this recognition?
Well, I've seen Hussam Zomlot, the Palestinian representative here in the United Kingdom, out doing the rounds this morning. That is not what he is saying.
Well, he wouldn't.
What he is saying is that this is an important step. It builds on the memorandum of understanding that the UK government under us has struck with the Palestinian Authority and the work that we're doing to support the Palestinian Authority at this time. And it is an assessment of the situation on the ground, not just in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, which is horrific with the violence and the expansion driven by settlers against Bedouin and Palestinian people.
I mentioned the state visits. It wasn't just Gaza where the president didn't shift an iota, did it? On almost anything that we wanted, we were told this visit was a crucial moment in trying to achieve and trying to obtain some big policy asks for us. So what did we get on either Gaza? What did we get on Ukraine? What did we get on tariffs? In concrete terms, not just the president kind of liking Britain. We know he likes Britain and having a positive attitude towards Britain. We knew all that already. What changed as a result of all the pomp and the circumstance that you afforded the president this week?
Well, Lewis, maybe you missed it, but we got £150 billion worth of investment.
I'm talking about
We've got a tech
political
deal.
asks.
We've got a prosperity deal. That is significant for working people right across our country.
We wouldn't have got those things without the state visit.
It's an investment in their nuclear industry and 1,000 jobs. That is significant.
And on Ukraine, did we get anything on Ukraine?
As you know, Ukraine ultimately is driven by Putin's imperialist ambitions. The UK continues to support Ukraine, and I applaud Trump's efforts to get a peace deal, but we see Putin is not ready for that peace deal. He's not serious about it, and so we're not seeing that moving forward at this moment. But we continue to pressure Putin. We believe that the right way to do that is with sanctions, and we will continue to support Ukraine, and European partners must do all they can at this time.
We've seen over the course of the last week or so, Deputy Prime Minister, not just repeated Russian incursions and attacks in Ukraine, to which we have become unfortunately accustomed, but we have seen incursions into NATO territory, into Poland, into Romania and Estonia, including what we saw with a Russian fighter jet over the course of the weekend. If they do that again, do we reserve the right to shoot down a Russian jet?
Well, the Secretary of State for Defence has been clear that when you send typhoons into harm's way to defend NATO territory, then of course they can shoot down if they believe that that is operationally necessary. We will defend all of NATO, all of those 32 countries coming together, and we will support partners like Estonia that require us to support them with air defences. There can be no further breaches by Putin at this time.
Are you confident that President Trump will support us if there are any further incursions into NATO territory? He's been rather ambivalent up to now.
Well, I sat next to President Trump at the NATO conference just a few months ago, and he recommitted the US to NATO. But of course, he also encouraged European partners to step up with their defense spending. We have done that here in the United Kingdom. There's more to do across the European family.
Are you 100% confident that, let's say, Putin decides to make an incursion into one of the Baltic states? Are you 100% confident that President Trump would honour a Article 5 invocation in the Baltics?
I am confident that Article 5 stands.
100%.
I am confident, given the number of US troops, thousands, tens of thousands across Europe, that are committed to European defence. But I also recognise at this time there are serious pressures in the Indo-Pacific, that America is also conscious of challenges in the South China Seas as well. And that's why this is a time to increase defence spending across all allies. And that includes North Atlantic and European allies as well.
Is Putin testing us?
Putin is testing us, and we must meet that test.
And what does that look like, practically speaking? Because there are plenty who say, as you know, Deputy Prime Minister, that even in the course of the last week, NATO hasn't done a great deal to deter him.
We must meet Putin head on. But of course, none of us want unnecessary escalation. And so these are finely balanced judgments that are made by Mark Rutte and the family of leaders across the NATO family. But Putin will see the typhoons that are flying over NATO territory and the protection that we're now giving to the Baltics, and he will think twice.
Just on one other matter, Deputy Prime Minister, obviously we've had something of a fiasco with regards to Peter Mandelson and the US ambassador's job, which is now vacant. I see it has been reported that you could be in line for that job. Is that a job that you fancy?
Lewis, I think you announced when I came on that I'm not this Deputy Prime Minister. I'm also Lord Chancellor and Secretary of State for Justice. I think 3 jobs is quite enough. We've got some fantastic diplomats.
So you rule out. You rule out. You're saying no, thank you. Thank you. It's very flattering to see this coverage, but no, thank you.
I think this is a little bit of mischief in the papers.
So you don't want
today.
it? You wouldn't like to be US ambassador?
I am not expecting to move my young family to Washington, D.C.
It's not expecting, but you wouldn't like it. You wouldn't want the job.
When the Prime Minister rang me up just 2 weeks ago and asked me to be Deputy Prime Minister, he asked me to support him domestically, to move back to a domestic brief, and of course to deputise for him internationally. That's what I'll be doing in the UN next week. But really, there is no serious prospect of me going to Washington, D.C.